Hello all. I just wanted to go through some stats that I've just been able to have a look at about Carmelo Anthony. Now, I've long known that he's not really that good of a player, and that's part of the reason why his teams never really do that well, and they don't really seem to suffer when he leaves a ball club. And obviously, as well, why he was culled so quickly in Houston. So, what it comes down to is that he has very pronounced weaknesses. But anyways, let's just look at these stats and we'll go on into it a bit more at a later time. So I've got 75 players here, all from fairly recent times. Mitch Richmond is the only real exception. Um, and Shaq is from a little bit yesteryear, but all the rest are pretty much from the last 20 years, like the entire careers were played. Anyways, we've got a number of stats here per 100, which means per 100 possessions, and it's just the net performance of how the team goes when they're on the court. It's supposed to be an estimate, so it's not exactly right. The one that is supposed to be exactly right is on court, but we'll get to that in a little bit later. Value over replacement player. This is from Basketball Reference, just a combination of all different stats that end up turning into how much more value a player adds compared to a replacement player. Win shares per 48, same sort of thing. It's different things that a player will do and it will contribute to a much higher score. But that encompasses both offense and defense, which means if a player is only one and not the other, well, they're obviously not going to be anywhere near as good. Defensive box plus minus, just a bit of an estimate of defensive capability and how much it improves the team's performance, or to the detriment. On court is the difference between how the team goes when they're on the court against their opponents. So this is saying that his team is 1.7 points better when he's on the court, whilst when it comes to on-off, it's the difference between them being on the court and off the court, so the team's performance compared to their opponents. So if anyone's got negative for here, which there are a couple, so like DeRozan and Scola and things like that, then they're not real good at all. Net is the difference between these two, on court and on off, and what that's really saying is how the team goes when this player is not playing. So if Carmelo is not playing, his teams end up being slightly worse than their opponents, minus zero point 0.1, whilst teams like players like Tony Parker, his teams excelled, and at the moment it's sorted by this. So we're going to go through a couple of these things, and our All-Stars is the number of All-Star times that these players were voted to the All-Star team. So, by the way, value over replacement player is a career thing, so it gets bigger the longer you've played, hence why Melo's actually score is pretty good. But anyways, let's have a quick look. We'll sort this one in order from smallest to biggest. So, when it comes to how well the team does when they're on the court per 100 possessions, Kawhi Leonard, DeAndre Jordan, Chris Paul, Tyson Chandler, they're all players near the top. Duncan. Carmelo, as we can see, is there with 0, and that would actually put him equal 61st on this list. So, behind a lot of obvious good players, and there with some bad players. There are some, one would think, reasonably good players that have not really had not so much positive experiences, it's just that their teams aren't really winning when they're on the court. We'll get to that in a second. Value over replacement player. If we sort by that, this is the best stat for Melo. He is 27th. So it sort of says a lot. It says that there's actually he'd be equal 27, equal with Giannis at the moment. He'll be overtaken very soon, and that will mean that there's 27 players just from this list that are ahead of him when it comes to how much value they've actually accumulated for their team in their career. And that says a lot, given that a lot of these guys have played less than what Carmelo has. Now, a real good way to gauge how much he has played compared to others and the impact per equal amount of time frame is win shares per 48 minutes. Because obviously not everyone plays 48 minutes, not everyone's played the same amount of games. So this actually is a more fair representation of the overall contribution, not just, you've played for a very, very long time. Because at the moment, Pau Gasol's got greater value on his team in total for his career, an NBA career, than what Steph Curry has. But no one's saying Pau Gasol's a better player than Steph Curry. Anyways, win shares. when we sort this one, we get 53rd place is where Carmelo is. So out of these 75 players, and it's only Shaq in the top 50 players ever than that 50 years team that they did in 96. Only Shaq is in there. So out of these 75 players, 74 of them that I've found, are competing with Carmelo for these next best 25 players, you would think. And obviously some of those next 25 players for the best ever 75, they're going to be from yesteryear as well. People that missed out initially, like Dominique Wilkins and Bob McAdoo, people like that. So you'd think only about the top 20 of these players should have really made the list. And again, if we look at win shares per 48, Carmelo's 0.121, which we can see at the top, would put us there with people like Bogut and Iguodala and DeRozan. When it comes to defense box plus minus, this is one of the most key stats. So I have sorted this one by color. So the more pronounced green it is, the better. Draymond Green, fantastic defender. Kawhi Leonard, Tim Duncan, fantastic. Chris Paul, also for his position, fantastic. Actually, not just for his position, just in general, fantastic defender. It's harder to have an influence if you're in a position where the player is normally smaller. And what this means is that it makes it harder to be of the good enough standard if you're a bigger player, but you can have a more pronounced impact. Obviously, as a defender, if you're 7'5", that's going to really help, as opposed to if you're 6'1". Realistically, the things you're going to be able to do should be a lot less. A really amazing tall player should be better than an amazing short player. That's why basketball's almost all through the years, it was been very center driven. Now, if we look at this, that minus 1.2 of Carmelo, that is very bad. Like, that's a negative. There's not, there are a few players on this list that are negatives. Even got Kobe here as a negative. Scola, Kyrie Irving, Allen Iverson, and a few big players as well, not known for their defense. Marcus Aldridge, Stoudemire, people like that. Carmelo's only better than one of these players. So out of all these players that I found, and 74 of them, I believe, were from very recent times, the only exception being Mitch Richmond, that Carmelo's got a worse defensive performance than all of them. And this, for me, speaks volumes about why his teams haven't done any good, because even when he has been able to contribute as an offensive player, I think he's 9th all-time and most points scored, he's an inefficient shooter and a shocking defender. Not a mediocre defender, not a bad defender, a shocking defender. And that's the main reason why he's so bad. When it comes to the on-court, obviously he doesn't have the most pronounced impact compared to others because he's not that good of a player and his teams haven't been that good. Obviously he's no Kawhi Leonard or Ginobili or people like this. He hasn't been part of, such successful teams. If we sort it by on versus off, that's a better way of saying, how the team does with you compared to without you. And again, he's only at 1.8, which would put him at the 67th best player, there with people like Tyson Chandler, Kenyon Martin, as opposed to, the much better players out there. Obviously, your Curry, LeBron, Garnett, Embiid, Paul, Draymond, Nowitzki, Shaq, Duncan, George. You've got great two-way players there generally. The net is interesting as well because this is now talking about how the team does without them. So you can actually see who has been part of shit teams and who has not been part of shit teams. Unsurprisingly, Tony Parker, Ibaka, Danny Green, and Leonard, Ginobili, players that were part of excellent teams. Their net is great. DeRozan is where it's misleading because he's been a bad player. His team actually does well when he's not there because he's a very inefficient shooter and quite a bad defender. Not quite as bad as Carmelo's, minus 0.8 compared to minus 1.2, but comparable. And now All-Stars. Actually, an interesting one to look at will be if I order it by value over replacement player. So this is how much you've contributed in your career, how much proper impact you've had, and now look how many All-Stars votes these players have got. So keep in mind, Carmelo's 35.8 value, so about 36 we'll call it, and he's had 10 All-Stars. when you go to 36, you've got 3, 7, 5, 7, 6, 5. You've even got a 1. Iguodala's contributed more in his career, much better defender, bigger difference, been part of a worse team. He's only got one All-Star. And this is something I'll go on about a little bit later. But yeah, it's just ridiculous how much plaudits Carmelo gets when he's actually not been a very good player. Now, I'm going to do a new video of this in some time where I'll talk a little bit more about things, and I'll actually try and select the players that I think should have been in that next 25 just from the last 25, 30 years, as much as possible, because this on-court, off-court stuff, which is probably the most important stat, I think, because actually from literal play-by-play data, that doesn't have the data any earlier than, I think it's 1998. So anyone that played before that, we don't have, a lot, even some of the players on this list, we don't have their whole career when it comes to these statistics. So yeah, what this all really adds up to is that Carmelo is not a very good player. By no means a scrub, but nowhere near top 75 all time, given that realistically he probably shouldn't even be. There's no way he would be in the top 25, 30, or 40 players of this list. So yeah, that says a lot. That says a lot. And if you compare him to this guy here, who quite interestingly didn't make the list, you can see that Howard's team does 11 points per 100 possessions better. Per 100 possessions, these teams 11 points better with him on the court. Yeah, much better scores for your on-off and for your on-court. He's a plus defender, unsurprising. A much better win shares per 48 minutes. His win shares per 48 minutes is actually his average for his career, and he's had some, rubbish years at times. His average is higher than Melo's highest ever. He's contributed more than Melo in the career, even though he's had a shorter career and played less games. And his team has been equally bad, minus 0.1 when he's not on the court. Which, by the way, I'm just going to sort that. That way you can see who's had the worst team. And again, it's not going to be that surprising. So at the bottom will be the worst. So Kevin Garnett's team was awful without him. Karl-Anthony Towns' team awful without him. Kemba Walker, same thing. Last little thing I'll show. John Wall is a pretty bad player. When we go here to order, actually two main takeaways aside from the Melo being bad here. If we order the win shares from highest to smallest, Chris Paul, LeBron, Harden, Leonard, Durant, Davis, you've got fantastic players there. There's no doubt. This is a stat where the cream rises to the top. Butler is an absolute star throughout. So he's contributed more to his career, almost more than to his career than Carmelo has in the entire career. He contributes much more often, much better defender, a much more pronounced difference when he's on the court compared to off, compared to Melo, like way better. So that's one big takeaway. And another big takeaway I wanted people to get was about how bad John Wall was. For somebody that has been where did he go? There he is. John Wall, his team does worse when he's on the court. He hasn't accumulated that much value, even though he's played for a while. He's not a positive on defense, not a negative, but not positive. The team actually is worse with his teams are losing when he's on the court. They're losing by more when he's off it, but he's just not that good of a player. Not that good of a player. Actually, last little thing, this stat on-off. Again, all these stats were from basketballreference.com. All I've done is copy them. I haven't done anything else, no calcs or anything. Yeah, these players down here are the worst from all the players on the list according to the net, and that makes sense to me. And DeMarcus Cousins not really that much better either. Then at the top, again, they're the people that we would expect. So I'm going to do another video about this sort of stuff soon. Let me know what you think.